Hello, everyone. My name is Chiu-Ki Chan, and today we are talking about Advanced Android Espresso. Before I start, I want to get a sense of how much testing experience you have, because I only have 40 minutes, so I want to speed up on the parts that you already know and then get more deep into parts that people are more interested about. So who has written an Android test before? Awesome. Who has written an Espresso test before? Great. So you pretty much know the beginner stuff, so I'm going to fly over the Hello World example so that we can get deeper. This is awesome. So this is a redundant question. What is Espresso? Espresso is automated UI testing. Before I started the talk, I've shown you how on the emulator I can go through different scenarios and then automatically verify things. You don't see the verification part because this is just the UI doing things. But in short, it's no hands testing. Well, that's a lie, because when you write the test, you have to code up using your fingers. But once you've written the automated UI test, Espresso can go through and execute all the instructions to tell it. So for example, you can ask it to click on the button and then verify the button text. The nice thing about that is that these tests, you can repeat it every time, right? So if you are doing it by hand, you may forget one step. You may forget to check one scenario. So having that automated UI testing gives you the confidence that once you write the test, you can keep running it, and then it will catch bugs for you. And what's different about Espresso compared to other UI testing library is that, well, first of all, it's a first-party library. It's written by Google and is published under the Android Testing Support Library. And it similarly uses action in a way that it automatically synchronizes with the app itself. What does that mean? So when you have a UI test like that, it's actually run on a separate process. Your app, your button gets rendered, but you want to click on the button. If you click on the button too early, before your button is rendered, your test will fail. So before Espresso came along, there were other frameworks. And I don't know how many of you have done this, but you will just sleep because you don't know whether the button was rendered yet. And that is kind of annoying, because do I sleep for 100 milliseconds? Do I sleep for 500 milliseconds? You just got randomly sleep sometime and hope that that button is rendered. Espresso is better at that in the sense that it will watch the UI thread for you, make sure that there's no more events queued up, and then go on and run the test code. So you know the button is already rendered. So your test is not failing because of synchronization issues. So, like I promised, I will have a Hello World example because not 100% of people raise their hands. Espresso has a formula. What it is on view, perform, and check. Let's go through an example to understand what it means. On view is a way for you to locate the view that you want to act upon. So for example, in our Hello World example, we have a greet button. The greet button is the thing that you want to act upon, so we want to look for it. In this particular case, we are going to locate it by its ID. So with ID means that please find me the view that has the ID, our ID greet button. That's an example of a view matcher. Once you found the thing, what do you want to do to it? In our case, we want to click. So click is a view action. You're going to act on it and then use the perform function to click on the button. Once you click on the button, you may want to verify that it changed state. For this particular example, you can only greet people once. So once you click on the greet button, it will get disabled. And here, you can see that we have a little bit of combination. Instead of having an it's not abled view assertion, we have a view enabled, and then we can negate it with a not operator. So far, so good. People have done this before? OK, fine. No interaction. That's all right. If you want to try out this example, a lot of the examples that I'm going to go through do have GitHub repositories, so you can go home and play with it and change the parameters and see what happens. So for the previous example I covered, there are actually two things going on. One is the things that are provided by the Espresso library, which the with ID, the click, and matches is enabled. Those are Android-specific things. We also have this not thing. It actually comes from the Hamcrest library, which are a Java library that allow you to do different kinds of assertions. So I can have a not operator. Maybe I want all of the conditions to be true. So that is a separate library that we can also use in Espresso. And we're going to spend the rest of the talk going through every single one of them and then bore you to death. No. This is just a cheat sheet like you can find on the internet of all the different view matches and view actions and view assertions you can do. And this is yet another cheat sheet on all the different things you can do with Hamcrest. Like you can do matching whether this is all, off, both, neither, and things like that. We're not actually going to go through all of that. But what I'm going to do is going to step you through a particular example so you can see it in action. In particular, we're trying to combine the matches to locate a view that we want. Let's go through a really concrete example. Let's say I have this app, and I have a title bar, which a lot of us have, right? You set the title of the app, and you want to verify that when you transition to a different stage, the title is showing what you expect it to show. How do I find this view, right? The earlier example we used with ID, because I wrote the app, I assigned the ID, I know how to find it. Toolbar, I don't actually have access to it. So how do you find out what to do? How many of you has used Hierarchy Viewer? Okay, so probably what you did was trying to figure out like what your layout's doing, you're trying to optimize. But the Hierarchy Viewer actually goes beyond just the content view that you provide. You can actually see the rest. So in my particular case, I found my awesome title under a text view, which is great, except that this text view has no ID associated with it, so I cannot locate it with ID. But one thing that we can see here is that the text view is a child of the toolbar. So we can use that as an extra condition to locate this text view, because if I just say, oh, look for a text view and then verify it has the text, my awesome title, the rest of your app may have 3 other text views, so it would not be able to find the correct one. So this is how you can locate that, pinpoint that particular view. I have a helper function that takes the title as a string, and then you see from the match toolbar title, oh no, I don't want to update Java. Yeah, right, bye. Yeah. Now you are interacting with me. Thank you, Java. Right, so let's get back to Espresso. So we have this function called match toolbar title. And what it does is that we're still calling on view just like the with ID, but I'm calling it with the Hamcrest matcher all off. And I want something that is a text view. So in Espresso, you can use is assignable from, meaning that it is a subclass of text view. So it could be a text view, could be a button. But that's not enough. Like I said, you may have multiple text views. So I also add an additional condition that says that I want that the parent is a toolbar. Okay? So then I have those 2 conditions as my view matcher. And then after I've located it, then I can go ahead and check that it matches the text from the title. So this way, you can pinpoint a particular view. For this particular example, we actually can do it better. This is a little bit fragile because we are looking into the internal structure of the toolbar, right? So today, we have a toolbar that has a direct child that is the text view that's holding my text, right? That's how I can use the with parent to say that I'm a text view and my parent is a text view. What if tomorrow we roll a new version of Android and then they decided that we are going to put this inside a linear layout and put some other things around because we can? You don't have access to that. So like if you're depending on a particular internal structure, you're in the world hurt, basically. So let's try to do it better. We are going to write a custom matcher. What we notice is that if you look at the toolbar, it actually has a function called getTitle. So you can actually programmatically get the title out and verify it. So that way, even if they change the layout of the title, of the toolbar, as long as they still honor this function, you're set. You can always get the title that way. So now in the new helper function, it's still called match toolbar title. It still takes the title you want to look for, but then we have a bound matcher. It's a little bit weird, the syntax, so bear with me. So the way the bound matcher works is that it's called bound because it is type safe. I tell it that I want it to act on a toolbar. So in the matcher safely function, I was given a toolbar as a parameter, And what I can do is then I can call the getTitle function out of the toolbar. Once I have that, then I can match it with a text matcher. Here, like when I create this with toolbar title matcher, I pass it a text matcher, which is a handcrest matcher. So that's why in the function above, it says with toolbar title is title, so that we can swap in other handcrest matchers such as has prefix, has suffix, contains, so that it's a lot more flexible. Are you with me? It's too complicated. Do you need 3 seconds to just stare at the slide? Actually, you're going to get the slide deck link at the end, or if you follow me on Twitter, I have scheduled an automatic tweet, so you'll get the URL automatically. Hint, hint, wink, wink. My handle is right there. Right, so this is how we can write a custom matcher. We have so many different things you can do with custom matcher, but I'm just going to give you one example so that you can get started. Right, so my notes are still there. And again, this whole thing is on a GitHub repository. I also have a blog post that walks through what I just told you, so if you want a refresher, you can go there. Next thing we are going to do on data. Has anyone used on data? Great, what does it do? Project. List views, yes. On data allow you to look for things in a list view. So for those of you who have not done it before, you may wonder, like, why do I need a separate thing from the on view, right? We already have on view. We can just look for the view and then verify things. So the problem with list view is that you can scroll, and then things can move in and out as the views get recycled when you scroll. If you are familiar with how list view works, it's not like if you have 100 items in your list view, all the views get instantiated. We actually only get the visible part, right? So if you're looking for a view that is further down the list, and you're just using the on view, you will not find it because it's not yet instantiated the way that you expect it to. So the formula for on data is slightly different. You still have a matcher, but instead of a view matcher, you have an object matcher. Because to find that particular item in your list view, we are going to look inside the adapter, essentially, and find it. Then you can perform the same thing. You can do view action, you can do view assertion, just like what we did with like clicking and verifying. So the data option is the interesting part here, because what happened is that if you are just matching the object and you have multiple list views in your app, you still want to locate which one you want to be verifying. So I hope it's not too small, the font. It's a little glare on my screen, so I need to bend. It's in adapter view, so you can pinpoint that list view that you want to act on. And then you can also say things like app position if you don't want to depend on the object matcher. And then within the list view, because a lot of the times we have a list view, but it's complex, right? It's not just like we have a list view and then it's the text view inside. We may have a relative layout that has an image and a text view and another text view. So you can use the on-child view, and then you can put, for example, a with ID in there so that you can say, I'll pinpoint this list item, and then I'll verify that the title is this thing. I have an example. It will be a little bit cleaner when I go through that. So we have a fairly simple app that's a list view that just shows some numbers in it. So let's say that we want to click on item 27. How would I do that? Well, as a human, what I would do is, oh, it's not on the screen. Let me just scroll down until I find item 27. This is pretty much exactly what Espresso does when you call it with the onData function. So here, just a little bit of how the app works. I have an adapter which takes an int array. So my data is actually just a lot of integers, right? And then what happens is when I click on one of the items in the adapter, I will show the selected item in the bottom. Can you see there's a gray bar in the bottom that's 8 because I clicked on 8. Okay, so that's the setup of the app. Now when I test, what I want to do is like click on the item that has 27 in it, and then verify that the bottom bar displays 27. So here, the first part is just precondition verifying. Before I click, I want to make sure that I'm not displaying the bottom bar. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the item that has the value 27 in the adapter view that has the ID r.id list, and then I'm going to click on it. The nice thing about Espresso is kind of reads like English, right? And then the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the view that has the text as an ID and make sure that it has the text 27 in it and also that it is displayed. So the object matcher is a little bit different from the view matcher in the sense that, well, A, you have to write it. There's not a lot built in just like with ID and things like that because Espresso doesn't know what kind of data you want to hold in your adapter. So if you look at the example with value here, again, we have a bound matcher. This time, I am going to be looking for this thing that is an main activity.item, which is essentially a container that has the integer in it with also the toString function so that the adapter knows how to display it. And with this, I can say that I'm going to give it a value in the constructor such that when I call the matchSafely function, I can verify that the item that I'm looking at is the item that I'm looking for, if that makes any sense. So what is going to happen is the Espresso is going to go through the whole adapter until it finds an item that returns true on matchSafely. That means that we got the item we're looking for. Are we good? Because we are going to go on the next thing, which is RecyclerView. This looks deceptively the same as the slide before, except I changed the title called RecyclerView. But it's actually very different under the hood. Have you used RecyclerView? Okay. Do you find that is a piece of cake, or what am I doing? RecyclerView can be a little bit tricky to get used to, partly because it is very different from ListView in the sense that, for example, we cannot use onData. Why cannot use onData? It's because onData acts on an adapter view. And even though RecyclerView looks just like a list view, it's actually a view group. It is not an adapter view, which it makes it powerful, but then also means that you have to learn a new set of patterns to use it. So in the case of Espresso, what we need to do is we are going to use the RecyclerViewActions. I just explained to you how list view works. This completely throw everything away, and we have to do it back in the old way. So now what we're going to do, in this test case, we are doing the same precondition checking with the text that's going to be displayed later. I said initially not displayed until wait for the ambulance to go by. And then we are going to have an on view directly. We are not going to use onID anymore. We're going to have an on view to look for the recycler view. So this is the parent container. And then we're going to perform the click action using the RecyclerViewAction action on item at position. So I'm going to ask Espresso to essentially go through that view group until I am at the logical position 27, and then I can proceed with the rest of the test. So contrasted with earlier what we have with onData, we are going through the values in the adapter view. So you kind of have to flip it back so that you're looking for the recycler view first, and then you are going to ask the recycler view to do these different actions on the perform part. Right, so that's one way you can ask for it at position. You can also ask for it with a view matcher, or you can ask for it with a view holder matcher. So the action on holder item is, so if you have not done recycler view before, you have a view holder essentially that holds the text view for you inside when you are doing all the recycling. So it's a little bit tricky. You have to flip the way you think, but once you have written it once, it's kind of the same formula. And again, the both examples are on GitHub, so it would be good if you are interested to just download them and compare how they work and change it. And then we get to the very confusing idling resource part. Has anybody used idling resource? Who think that this is the... Yeah, I understand it like off the bat. One person. Okay, come on up stage now. So it's a little bit of a mind twister in the sense that, well, we'll go through the example. It's a little bit easier to understand. So very, very early in the talk, I told you that when you are using Espresso, the nice thing is the synchronization, right? So Espresso keep an eye on the UI thread for you, so that it makes sure there's nothing on the UI thread, and it also keeps track of the async task. So if you're using async tasks to do some long-running thread in the background, it will wait until that's done until it go ahead and verify things, which is nice and good, except sometimes we do other things that takes a while that we want it to wait. And again, sleeping is a little bit non-deterministic, right? Like you sleep, it may or may not be done. So Espresso has this idea of an idling situation. So these two conditions is what Espresso checks to understand that it's idle before it proceeds. You can also add your own. And this is when the custom idling resource come in. We are going to go through an example that we can use to verify that an intent service is not running. So the way we are going to do it is that, let me just set up kind of the scenario. So for example, you have an app that you want to click a button and then something happens in the background using an intent service. We want to wait until the intent service is done, then we will update the UI. So we don't want to ask whether the UI has been updated until that intent service is done. So this is the basic, idling resource is an interface. So there are 3 functions that you need to override. Number 1 is get name. Like, that's simple, I can just give it a name. But you need to be careful because essentially what this happens is that when you register your resource, the name gets used as the key. So you need to make sure that if you have multiple of them going at once, they have to have different names, otherwise it will all be overriding each other. And then the register idle transition callback doesn't really do much. You can just copy in this code. Basically, you're just stashing away the callback so that in the inIdleNow function, when you determine that I'm idle, you can call the callback to tell Espresso, say, hey, you can go on, you can continue the test. And this is the meat of the idling resource. So for us, we will have a function that determines whether the intent service is running. And what it does is actually, Espresso, when you register your idling resource, it has a list of all of them, right? And then every time it wants to do a view interaction, meaning like a view assertion, view action, or like when you're trying to look for a view, it will first go and ask every single one of the idling resources, say, are you idle? Are you idle? And if it's not idle, then it will loop on the main thread until it gets idle. So that when someone calls this callback, it will get interrupted and say, hey, I'm done. And then it will check again. So that way, Espresso will essentially sleep for you, but in a more clever way. So for this particular example, the way I determine whether the intent service is running is that I query the activity manager looking for the particular service that I am, in this case, called the repeat service, right? So I'm going to match and see whether that particular service is in the list of the running services. If so, then I say, yes, it's running, and then I negate that to say that that means it's not idle. So a lot of the times when you want to use idling resource, what you need to think about is like, how do I know that my app is busy? So once you can determine that, then you can wrap it in this class and put it in the isIdleNow function, and then register and unregister, then Espresso is going to watch that condition for you. Good? Questions? All right. So like I said earlier, what we need to do once you write the idling resource is that you are going to need to register and unregister. Usually what you do is you do it in the before function to register, and then you do it in the after function to unregister. So this is a JUnit 4 style, which I use the annotation. If you're still using JUnit 3, you can put it in your setup and teardown function. I say usually because there are also other scenarios where, for example, you may be having an idling resource that's watching a dialog, right? So maybe you press a button, and then there's a loading dialog that comes up, and then you want to wait until the dialog to be gone, and then proceed with the remaining of the test. So if you register it from the beginning of the test, it will be, you will basically, the moment you press the button and the dialog pop up, it will always be like waiting for that to happen. So you may need to sometimes register it in the middle of the test. It depends on what, the scenario, but usually this will work. So we also remember to unregister just to be a good citizen, even though maybe you don't care about it anymore. And this one I actually wrote a lot of blog posts about because somehow it's a very confusing topic. And I think just the notion of registering something so that when it's not busy, I get a callback. It's a little bit confusing. So you can go ahead and read all these blog posts, and then the Espresso samples repository has all of them, so you can compile them and play with them. Right, and then this is a really fun part now. So this is, I feel like, the really advanced stuff, where we are going to combine Espresso with Dagger and Mockito. Who has used Dagger before? Whoa, awesome. And Mockito? Cool, this is really an advanced crowd. This is good. So the reason why I want to introduce these two things, even though they're like not strictly Espresso, is because there are a lot of scenarios when you are testing, you want to make sure that you have a hermetic environment, meaning that you control everything. So for example, you could potentially be doing the UI test by just talking to your live server, right? You can be clicking button, fetching data, and then displaying it and verifying it. But what if your server is down? What if your internet is down? That doesn't mean that your code is broken, right? So if you use Dagger and Mockito, you use Dagger for dependency injection, and then you can use Mockito to inject something that you can completely control rather than an external thing. So Dagger, if you have not done dependency injection before, it's not just for testing. Like, dependency injection is very useful in terms of you're just trying to take away the logic of creating all these helper objects, essentially, into a central place, right? So it really doesn't really have anything to do with testing, except the fact that because you have a central repository of knowing how to create these objects, you can very easily swap in a new set of mocked objects using Mockito when you test. And like I said earlier, Mockito is a library that allows you to mock the objects. We can go through an example and see how it actually works. So to just give you a very quick overview of Dagger, this is Dagger 2, which is slightly different from Dagger 1. The way you are going to define your objects is that we are going to have a component. A component is essentially a collection of modules, and each module is something that knows how to create a particular object. So for us, we are going to have an interface that's the demo component, and then we have two different things. One is the application component, and one is a test component. So this is the code. It's a little bit hard to understand, so I also made a very helpful diagram. So in the application component, what it has is, in a particular example, we'll have a clock module which provides a clock, which allows you to know what the time is now. And the application component knows how to inject this clock into the main activity. But when we test, we are actually going to provide a different thing. We are going to provide a mock clock module. Why? Because the time changes. If you are always testing against now is different all the time, so you cannot really verify like, what it's going to do. So this test component is also injected into the main activity so that we can supply a known time to it. And then it's also injected into the test because that's where we supply the time. It'll be a little bit clearer when we go through the code. So in the application, what we're going to do is that we are going to have a private component, and we are going to stash it when someone calls set component. But if no component has been set, we are going to create a demo component, which is going to provide the current time as of now, right, rather than a canned time. And then, once we have that going on, then we can provide different time module, clock module, depending on whether you are in the app context or in the test context. So when you're in the app, this is Joda time, is a really nice day and time library. When you call new daytime, it just returns the moment now. But when we test, we are not actually going to be calling the new data time function directly. What we're going to do is that we are going to use Mockito. So this is the Mockito syntax. It can get a little bit weird in the beginning. But what I'm telling is I'm telling Mockito, hey, Mockito, if somebody calls the function getNow on my clock object, return this date time that I know, which is the year 2008 in September on the 23rd, which is when Android launched. Ta-da! So this way, even though time passes, every time I run the test, now is this particular time. Then I can go ahead and in Espresso, by now you're very familiar with this syntax, right? On view and check. And I can actually check that that particular text view is displaying 2008-09-23 because I have provided a date that I know, right? If I just say now, well, now it's going to say 2015-08-27, but tomorrow it's going to be something different, and your test is just not going to be deterministic. So this is a super powerful technique. This is just one example of something that you want to inject. There's a lot more information. So this particular example, I have, again, a blog post that you can step through and also a GitHub repository. I also have another example that I go through where we are using it to inject a shared preferences. The reason why we want to do that is, if you think about it, right? The whole point of having a shared preference is so that you can store the state, right? You can remember that, oh, the user told me that his favorite animal is a cat, right? So next time he comes back, and show him a cat picture. But if you're running a test, you don't know whether the app already has that variable stashed away, right? So you cannot verify whether I should be showing a cat or a dog, because depending on who used the app last time, that may be different. So you can use Mockito this time instead of injecting, instead of using Mockito, you can use Dagger, but instead of using Mockito to inject something that you are going to be always doing all those things I told you, right? It's like, oh, when someone called the get function return cat, you can also swap in something that is an in-memory implementation for the same thing, right? So if you think about your shared preferences, it's just a key value store, right? So I can just have an in-memory hash map, where then I know it's always from a clean slate, there's nothing in it, and every time I run the test, I can put in cat and dog and dolphin and whatnot, and it's not going to be mucking with the app state. Anyway, so that's another example why you may want to do shared preferences. And we kind of did a whirlwind tour of a lot of the different techniques that you can learn from Espresso. So for example, we did matcher, view action, and view assertion. That's the basic formula of how to use Espresso. And then we went through the example of combining the matcher to pinpoint that title in the toolbar. But then we were like, that's not good enough. So let's write also a custom matcher. And then we have a list view and a recycle example. The idling resource is the thing that you can teach Espresso to wait for the condition that you are looking for, so that the test, you don't need to sleep essentially. The test will pause until your app is ready to be verified. And finally, we dove into a little bit more different tools that you can use with Espresso, namely Dagger and Mockito. And that is not all, actually. I have another thing that you can, if you want to learn even more about Espresso, this is a repository that I open sourced like 3 days ago. It's an application that uses the Google Plus API. So it's a game. You're welcome to download it to play it here as well. It uses the nearby API. So basically what happens is people can log in using the Google Plus, and then they can go around and use the nearby API and try to find new friends, and then we are going to take the names of people. So for example, if you find me, then you will get the letter C because I'm Chiu-Ki and my name starts with C, and then you can go ahead and spell different words with it. And then I'm going to stash that once I find a new friend into a database. How do we even test that, right? Like, how do I test a Google Plus login? Because the Google Plus API is a Google Play Services provided thing, and then it retrieves the accounts that's installed in the device, right? So you could potentially set up your app with a particular test account, and then have Espresso always click on the same account and make sure that you go through the same scenario. And then, okay, fine. Then next, how do I find friends to, because when you use the nearby API, you have the two phones close to each other on the same screen. So now you have to change two particular Espresso instances running. Don't worry, it's not like that. So you see that, right, earlier when I run it through in the emulator, it's actually just a single emulator, no phone. So the way, I can give you a quick overview. So the way it works is that I actually isolated the Google API client into its own class so that I can use Mockito. So instead of, when I press the sign button here on the screen, it's going to try to connect to the API client, and then it will have a callback that on connect is going to go ahead and move on to the next screen. So in the test, what I do is that when somebody initializes it, I'm going to stash away the callback, and then when someone clicks the button, I'm going to call the callback. That sounds really weird. I'm going to call the callback, and then the rest of the app will flow. So there's a lot of pretty advanced and Mockito techniques that you can go and study. And this also, not just that, that's the Espresso side. You can also learn how to do JUnit testing, because a lot of it is actually logic, right? So what I want to do is I want to see if I have the correct letters to spell this word, right? Those has nothing to do with Android, so I try to make it so that it's a pure Java test. Anyway, I'm pretty proud of this repository, so I would love it if you can go check it out. And I also have something that's in between, which most people don't talk about, which is a UI-less instrumentation, meaning that I have access to the context. This is how I test the database. So the database, I don't need to see it because there's nothing to see, but I ask the instrumentation to give me a context so that I can give it a test database that I can change and it doesn't muck with the live database, and then I can verify conditions. So go ahead and check that out. And if you are not convinced that you should check it out, someone on Google Plus said something really nice about this repository. He said that there's some seriously badass testing kung fu on display. So I didn't say it, somebody else said it. So go ahead and take a look, and hopefully you will learn something even more beyond the talk. And with that, thank you very much. Like I promised, the first link is the whole slide deck. So if you have been frantically taking pictures, you didn't need to. You just need to take a picture of this one slide. So that will point you to the whole slide deck, which is online, and then you can go through and come back to this last slide. The two GitHub repositories are the examples that I show you throughout the talk. The first one is actually a repo with multiple projects inside, so you can go through the hello world, you can do the list view, you can do all the different ones. And the FriendSpell one is a standalone app that you can study how to do all the different, more advanced techniques really on. We have this external library that I don't have control of. How do I test that? And then the rest is like where else you can find me on the internet. I do quite a bit of teaching on video as well. So Pro site is a place that I publish. So that's the bit.ly link. And Gumroad is another. So the difference between the two is that I control the second one. So if you want to, for example, get the course that I told you earlier about the shared preferences, if you use the coupon code, Droidcon NYC, you can get a discount. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go ahead and download that course. And the rest of the links are just find me on Twitter, find me on Google+. I also have newsletter. I have a public speaking newsletter. If people think that standing here and telling people what they know is way cool and they want to get started, you can subscribe to tinyletter.com/techspeak. And I'm going to leave this slide on for a bit so that people can take pictures. Thank you very much. I'm not going to take live questions, so if you want to ask me questions, just come on over and we can have a little chat. Thank you. Yay. Cool.